Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On today's show, we recap the third Summer League game for the Bucks. Another loss, but a lot of bright spots from A.J. Johnson. Some news on Khris Middleton and Frank's thoughts on the signing that the Bucks made earlier in the day, the addition of Gary Trent Jr. We get into that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Frank Madden, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find us on YouTube as well, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We had the third Summer League game for the Bucks on Tuesday night. Another loss to the Los Angeles Clippers with a lot of interesting moments. There's some of the not so good to get to, and we'll do that in a second. But Frank, it seemed like this was the game that A.J. Johnson really captured the hearts of a lot of Bucks fans out there.
Well, I mean, I didn't get to discuss game one with you guys over the weekend, but certainly game one was an encouraging start. I think a lot of the maybe worst fears about him as a prospect were allayed just by the speed and kind of flashes that we saw in the first game on Saturday. But certainly, quiet game on Sunday, and then today, again at his age and just. He's going to be turned 20, I think, fairly early in the season, but, the physical maturity obviously is not there, right? I mean, he hopefully, I don't think he's ever going to be like 210 pounds of muscle or something like that, but, he's 167 pounds and he looks it, right? I mean, he looks like a little kid out there still in a lot of ways, but scores 7 quick points, got a little friendly roll on an early 3-pointer, but, again, just the speed kills, especially in perhaps a disorganized setting like this. His quickness in the open court, is just really difficult to handle. And I was encouraged. He got an early drive in the half court. What I'm seeing from him is he loves going to his left, but then finishing with his right hand. Right, yeah. He actually writes left-handed, which I noticed when he was signing his contract. So it's always interesting, these guys who, there's been a bunch of guys like this, like LeBron and Larry Bird are also left-handed, but obviously play right-handed. And so it's always interesting to see like guys who do this, are they then maybe a little bit more capable with their left hand on the floor? So far, we have not seen evidence of that from AJ, but he seems capable of going to either side, which is very important for a guard. And again, like we're certainly seeing a lot of like maybe dribble happiness from him in these games, which not shocking for a young guy, but the ability to get to the rim and maybe not finish super consistently, but tonight did it repeatedly. And, again, like at this age and this kind of relative maturity, I think you're largely looking for kind of those flashes, right? And that the polish is going to have to come, and there's, a lot that still needs to happen for him to ever become, a valuable NBA player, rotation type of player. But I think the important thing is we're seeing the broad outlines. We're seeing why the Bucks were willing to make a gamble like this on a guy who obviously, has not proven that he can be productive at a high level, having barely played in Australia. So, the thing for me is like I'm like looking like, other high school stats. I haven't been able to find like high school stats in terms of his shooting splits. I have no idea. Like, is he like a good free throw shooter? Can he shoot threes? Like, all of these things were like very, mystery box for us coming into this game. He shot 30% from three and 50% from the line last year in Australia, but it was super low sample. So to see him the last couple games, hitting threes with some consistency, I think it was 3 for 5 tonight. I think, what was he, 2 for 3, 2 for 4, something like that in the second game. I think 2 for 9 in the first game. But, his percentage from three has actually been respectable, and he looks confident doing it. Not to say he's, Dame Lillard 2.0, but again, like it's all small sample, but that's all we have with him. And so do I think that he's going to, he's making his push and he's going to be, a guy that bursts into the rotation? No, but I think people like to think of like Tyrese Maxey, given his experience with Doc. I think Tyrese was more polished, as a rookie than where AJ is now. But I can kind of see it, right? Like almost like a change of pace tailback in the NFL, right? Like kind of like the speed guy, third down back. Like maybe it doesn't happen this year, but maybe in year 2 or something like that, or who knows? Maybe he can use that speed and at least be kind of one of these guys that uses that to really push the pace. And I think importantly tonight too is we saw him make some plays as a passer. That was encouraging to see because again, I don't know that he's ever going to be a super high level passer, a super high level, processor of the game. But this was just I think overall just a really encouraging performance. I mean, to put up 22 points on, efficient shooting, some rebounding, some assists, a couple blocks, I think all in all, just a really encouraging performance from him. And regardless of what happens in these next couple games, I think something to definitely kind of take from this the summer league, regardless of kind of anything else.
You and Camille talked about it too on the night of the draft. She and I talked about it the last couple days too, of when you tried to properly assess the Bucks off season. And again, just keeping in mind what they actually had to work with. The one negative's probably not the right way to put it, but the one thing that you would point to and say, I wish they would have, was those were the only 2 assets that they had to, whether attached to a contract or whatnot, to make any type of move, was those 2 draft picks. And look, it may prove to be that neither AJ Johnson nor Tyler Smith ends up having any type of NBA career or does much of anything for the Bucks. But you do see GMs get into trouble a lot more when you're drafting to fill an immediate need versus just who do we think is the best on the board, number one. Secondly, the whole, well, by keeping the pick, you couldn't attach that to, fill in the blank contract and get out from under it. But I think the danger with that is, we've certainly had the conversation about Brook Lopez. I just didn't see the move out there that would have made you a better team that involves shipping out Brook Lopez. It would make you cheaper and potentially younger. That doesn't mean better. And same thing of attaching draft picks to, let's say, a Pat Connaughton or Bobby Portis. You get under that second apron and you would open up something like a taxpayer mid-level to use, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're getting a player that's better. You were able to get Gary Trent Jr. without any of that. And when you look at some of the players that were out there, it wasn't a great free agent class. And even what guys were willing to go for, you're probably best served just saying, is there some type of player or assets we can get at 23 and 33 that we feel like somebody's missing the boat on and we can develop? And, we're probably best served to go into the season with those contracts that we think are a hindrance. They'll be expiring, easier to move at the deadline or potentially in the offseason if one or both of those players opt into that final year. And look, at the other option is maybe we can rehab them and get them back to the level they were before.
Yeah, I mean, I was very curious leading up to draft night for the reasons you mentioned, if they would make some kind of move. But I think, and I've been seeing a lot of people have been asking me, on Twitter and stuff about different permutations of, Pat Connaughton plus something to a team that can absorb his salary. And then, you use the taxpayer mid-level or, you're under the apron. Now you can do some aggregating trade, things like that. And again, maybe I'm just, part of me is like, I feel like I'm just getting, uncreative in my old age, Justin. I've definitely kind of been looking at the last few weeks and just thinking like, I wasn't sure that the Bucks were going to use both picks. That for sure, I think surprised me a bit. I thought at least one of those picks would get moved. And again, maybe not in a kind of salary dump type thing, because I think the value play in like using a pick to dump a salary so that you can use the taxpayer mid-level. Again, the taxpayer mid-level is like what, 5.2, and you're talking about especially someone like a 10-year vet. They're making 3.3 on a minimum, even though it only counts $2 million against the salary cap. So it's like I'm not saying $2 million is nothing, but like it's not like some huge swing. The value of the taxpayer mid-level has dropped in the new CBA. It has been so like they've further, it's kind of like nobody's really talked about it, but like they've further devalued the
Middle
levers
class.
that
Yeah.
like the first apron teams have
Yeah.
with the taxpayer mid-level, because it's just not worth that much, right? But the good news for the Bucks is, we talk about the Bucks as sort of a team, obviously, that's been challenged by the second apron and the limitations that puts on transactions. Hey, the upside is the market, as you mentioned on, I don't know how many podcasts you've recorded today, Justin. I listened to one of them, but you talked about like kind of the middle class being kind of smashed down, and guys that you would previously expect getting at least taxpayer mid levels, but being more in that 10 to the regular mid levels, like 13, but being more in that range, the Gary Trents of the world. And I think it sounds like Gary Trent may have had options at the taxpayer mid level, and he opted to go with a smaller deal from the Bucks because of the opportunity and the chance to win, and obviously Dame and Doc recruiting and all that stuff. But I think my kind of skepticism that the Bucks were going to do one of these like salary dump moves to use the tax mid level. I mean, they got Gary Trent on the minimum, so they were right. Like they're, like in hindsight now, it would have been stupid to open up the taxpayer mid level, even if maybe there was some other player you could have gotten. Offhand, I don't think there's really some guy that I can picture them getting. Now the downside is it's going to be really hard to retain Gary Trent next year because his salary slot is a minimum and you can only go to 120% of that unless, and it's possible that the Bucks can have the taxpayer mid-level next summer. But again, like we probably don't need to kind of go all the way down that route. But this is the challenge of being a team with a super high salary and not having flexibility, is you basically have to reload every offseason and find the next Bobby Portis, the next Pat Connaughton, the next Malik Beasley, whatever it might be. And, we've seen it, a lot of depressing Vegas Bucks additions with first round draft picks that have not panned out, second round draft picks that have not panned out. The draft has obviously not been a place where John Horst and company have done very well, or John Hammond prior to that, with the exception of Giannis. But the saving grace has been these veteran low value contracts. Brooke Lopez, Bobby Portis, Pat, the kind of, the guys that really rounded out the rotation of the championship team arrived on BAE biannuals or less.
Yeah.
And obviously now these past few years, we've seen them be able to take swings and get guys that, look, Malik Beasley's not a world beater, but like that was really good value, right? Like as the fifth starter, that regular season, that 5-man unit was awesome. They had the best net rating in the league. Malik Beasley, the team was really good when he was on the floor. And we can talk about more Gary Trent in a second, but yeah, I think the important thing is, I mean, well, it depends how you view it, but this takes off certainly some of the pressure, as you and Camille discussed, on those young guys, that it's actually more tolerable now that you have a bunch of young guys, that, you're not going to get dinged necessarily this coming season, because man, we wish we would have used that asset for a more established player. But again, I don't know. Hopefully, it's allowed us to enjoy summer league a little bit more, because I think AJ has flashed. And again, I think there's still. It's kind of interesting. It's like I've been very encouraged, very relieved, but also like not any more confident that he's going to play this year in a lot of ways, because it still feels like it's kind of more the broad outlines, and hopefully he'll get reps with the herd and get game action. Like he's got like no in between game. He almost had that really nice shake for a mid ranger, but like it's either gets to the rim or shoots a three, which there are worse things in life. But certainly there's a long way to go for him. But you can definitely see the way with that speed that he could be a useful player pretty early in his career. And again, hopefully Doc can figure out how to get kind of the Tyrese Maxey 2.0 thing from him, because that would be a pretty good outcome from a 23rd pick in the draft.
Be a very good outcome for this team. You mentioned Gary Trent Jr. Some more thoughts on that signing, and we mentioned some of the flashes we've seen from AJ Johnson. On the flip side, the conversation that I suppose needs to be had about MarJon Beauchamp here in summer league. So we'll get into that coming up next on Locked On Bucks. Well, for many of us, summertime means hitting the road, getting out and taking in some baseball games, maybe getting to some new stadiums that you have not been to in the past. And that is where Game Time comes in with the ultimate assist for you. They offer last minute deals where you can find up to 60% off when you buy last minute for concerts, sports, comedy, theater, and more. Even flash deals where you save within the app exclusive deals on select seats ahead of that game or event. You can see the all in price. Just toggle that feature on, and you see the total fees you will pay up front. No sticker shock once you get to that checkout screen. And most importantly, a panoramic view where you can see the views from your seat within the app before you buy. This all comes with the Game Time lowest price guarantee as well. You get 110% of the difference back if you can find those seats for cheaper, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So the other side of the spectrum, Frank, is found it rather interesting that we heard from we heard about Doc Rivers from MarJon Beauchamp telling him, I need to see you playing 2 games. Whatever happens after that, it's kind of up to you, which I think a lot of people took as, hey, if MarJon Beauchamp wants to play all 4 games, 5 games, he'll do it. I kind of read into it I need to see 2 games from you. Anything after that is up to you, as in, if you don't show me what I need to see in those first 2 games, then there's some things we probably have to reevaluate. That's the sense that's up to you. And 3 games in now to his 3rd summer league experience, which I think Eric had in his story. He's one of 8 players in his draft class to be in 3 summer leagues, and one of those is his teammate, Ty Washington. This is not I know it's summer league, so you don't want to put too much into it, but this is not what you were hoping to see from MarJon.
No. I mean, it's an interesting the discourse about him, because I think, there's always this dialogue around the role for a guy in a summer league setting versus how that translates or doesn't translate to what he's going to be asked to do when he's playing NBA minutes. And I think with MarJon, I think in his first summer league, he actually was he was largely off ball. He was not in a ball dominant role. He was not running pick and rolls, anything like that. And he had put up kind of numbers that would reflect that. Last year was in a much more prominent role, had 20 plus in the first 2 games. Was he scoreless in the 3rd game? I know he was I remember him having a terrible 3rd game after really playing well in the first 2 games. And so I was having kind of flashbacks to that, in the sense that, he scored 22, 19, put up stats in the first 2 games. I think what Eric Name wrote in his article kind of previewing all this was, decisiveness. That was the word that jumped out to me. That was the word that I wanted from him. It just feels like his biggest challenge has been that he just does not process the game fast enough, really, on either end. And that, again, it's just, he's just not moving at the speed from a kind of hoops IQ perspective that you need him to. And again, just making quick decisions, moving the ball, not taking the extra dribble, not taking that extra beat, etc. On defense, he can't get over screens, kind of has these little brain farts and loses his man, etc. Doesn't know if it's a switch or, not, things like that. And so again, that first game, what was it? 3 kind of forced threes that he airballed, maybe got his shot partially blocked. So even though he put up the big 22 points, that big 3rd quarter, there was that nagging feeling of well, he's kind of just being the best player in a pickup run right now.
Right.
Doesn't feel like it's necessarily stuff that translates. And to be honest, look, MarJon has enough talent. He's now in his 3rd year. I'm totally fine. Somebody's got to take shots on this team, right? It's not Kevin Durant's out there with you guys. like somebody's got to take shots, right? So I'm fine with him taking shots and being more ball dominant than he's going to be for the Bucks on, in a more typical role. But by the same token, you also want him making good decisions, not over dribbling, et cetera. And it feels like, there just hasn't been progress there. And obviously tonight, the numbers were bad in the box score, and, just like some of the careless passing, he had 3 fouls early. Again, like I don't think any individual game he's going to have in summer league is, going to change my mind about where he is at as a player. I was, kind of definitely skewing negative / skeptical on him coming into this summer, even though, again, I mean, it's only 2 years in, and, on a veteran team like the Bucks, it's not like you're going to get tons of chances. Shot 40% from 3 last year. I mean, imagine if you told us coming into last year he's going to shoot 40% from 3 and, nearly 49% from the field. Be like, oh, okay, like that sounds like real progress. But, as we watched it, we just didn't feel like kind of it hung together in the right way. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, I think with these young assets, right, I think we'll look back on it at this point. You say, like, man, what could the Bucks have gotten a year ago? If they're willing to move him, right? Could they have used him, in a trade a year ago? And same reason, like, I mean, I think Andre Jackson is obviously in a different spot, has different strengths, is a year behind him in terms of NBA experience. But like even last year, I mean, like, I don't know, there were talks about, like, oh, would you give up, Andre Jackson in like an Alex Caruso trade? And to me, it was like, of course I would do that. Like, my best case scenario for Andre is that he becomes like maybe an Alex Caruso-ish player. So absolutely I'd give him up. And, so again, I get it. Some people are kind of, want to clutch to the young guys and, hey, let's actually develop someone for once. But yeah, with MarJon, I mean, it's tough. And I mean, they have his 4th-year option coming up this fall that they have to pick up or not. And I think it's 4.7 million.
Yeah.
Are they gonna pick that up? I don't know. If not, then he becomes an expiring salary. And again, there have been guys who don't have their option picked up and then kind of stick around. I think Kevon Looney, maybe the example that comes to mind, but certainly not a leading indicator that you're gonna end up living up to your first round potential if your team doesn't see enough in you to pick up a 4th-year option. So yeah, it's been a tough look. I don't know, Justin. I think it was I believe Larry Sanders. I think it was going into Larry's 3rd year. People can fact check me on this. I thought Larry went to Vegas going into his 3rd year and like sucked and like was not good. It was like he was actually better in prior years. I think he may have cut short he didn't play in that many games. And it almost seemed like a mercy thing. Like, all right, let's just stop this. And then he ended up having kind of his breakout year thereafter. Again,
it was his 3rd year.
Very different types of players, but still.
Yeah, it was his 3rd year where he was in the running for most improved and defensive player of the year. I think Bucks fans would be ecstatic if that was what you saw from MarJon, who 6 points, 2 of 9 shooting. I don't think his first field goal came until the 3rd quarter. You mentioned the fouls that he had early. Only 3 turnovers, which did not match the eye test. He had 7 last game, and that was kind of, again, they're asking him to do a little bit more with the ball, but it goes back to what Doc Rivers said in that interview with Eric Name, or to MarJon in the interview with Eric Name. And then what we heard a little bit from Doc during the broadcast as well of what they're looking for, not just from MarJon, but look, we can get into this in the next segment. Listening to Doc Rivers talk, the most interesting thing that came from it, we'll obviously get to, but just hearing him talk about Andre Jackson Jr., I'm ready to be disappointed, but it's hard not to think, man, he's going to have a pretty decent role with this team, just listening to the way that Doc Rivers described him. So we'll get into some of what Doc Rivers had to say coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Frank, I know I mentioned we had a couple more things to get to on the Gary Trent Jr. piece. You kind of touched on that, though, of Camille and I mentioned you don't have the bird rights. It would be tough in theory to retain him on the surface, but as you pointed to, hey, there's ways that they could get to like a taxpayer mid-level to potentially keep him. But you and I were talking about it too. Nate Duncan pointed out too in his email update earlier today after that signing of, once you kind of go down to that vet minimum path, it's not that you only stick on veteran minimums, but you kind of carve out a lane of, well, you're no longer in contention for the full mid-level and getting up to that value. So while he is young and you would think, well, this may just be a prove-it deal and eventually he'll land elsewhere for much more money, historically, at least with this CBA, that hasn't been the case. So that is the one sense of hope there for the Bucks. But I think, the other thing I wanted to touch on before we get to the Doc Rivers comments is you mentioned this on Twitter too. Camille and I went through, look, in theory, here's the 3 guys that you added. They're all better than what you had last year. It's not to say that there's no questions. And that's kind of what you brought up too. I think any Lakers fan that you talk to would tell you, well, good luck with Taurean Prince in the playoffs. So I think that is, because I saw a few people push back too, well, what are the questions if these guys are better? The question is still, who's the closing group for this team in the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, and I was listening to your pod with Camille like right before the Trent news broke, and you guys raised it, which we were talking about I think I raised your comment from a year ago about not thinking that the Bucks starting playoff shooting guard was on the roster yet when we had our live pod a year ago, talking about last year's team. And this is pre-Dame trade, so Grayson Allen was still on the team, Drew was still on the team, and I mean, I think we can say the opening night shooting guard is now on the roster. I think that will clearly be Gary Trent. I will say this: great signing. Full kudos to the Bucks for once again mining, as I was saying earlier, mining the kind of minimums and coming away with 3 guys I think you can feel good about. I think relative to what you saw from Jay Crowder last year, especially in the playoffs, obviously the bar is very low for Taurean Prince. I think he can certainly eclipse that. I also think he's more suited to playing small forward than Jay was. I think Jay was really a small ball forward at this stage of his career, but he had to play a lot of small forward, started in Chris's absence for long stretches. So again, but the advanced metrics on Taurean Prince have never been very favorable, like especially the offensive side, which you look at him, he's like, well, he's a solid 3-point shooter. He doesn't try to do too much. How can he be bad? But not a great passer, not really like what you would say is like a connector. So, offenses, he generally just has not been kind of additive in that regard. And, there's been the criticism from Laker fans who, I think my read, it seems like Laker fans mainly were just mad that he played a ton last year, not that he shouldn't have had a role. So that's good. My friend, Daman Rangula, who's my resident Laker fan friend, who also, he has a soft spot for the Bucks. He, talked tons of crap about Malik Beasley when the Bucks signed him last year. Hated Malik Beasley, but he had much better things to say about Prince and basically said like, hey, just put him in the right role. And yeah, I mean, I think DeLon Wright, though, again, kind of much lower drama than Pat Bev. As you guys pointed out, curious to see like the Pat Bev kind of energy juice, whatever, like to what extent that may be helpful. He's not, DeLon Wright is a very, much quieter guy than that, but I think a better, but I think definitely a better player. The defensive metrics on him year in and year have been really strong. And, I think a bit steadier too offensively, like not quite as extreme in terms of Pat, like just very limited. Not that DeLon's some great offensive player. So I think, expected value from DeLon Wright higher than Pat Bev at this point. And then I think the Trent kind of piece of this, Trent versus Beasley. I think Gary Trent is a better player, but I think it is closer than maybe kind of like in the euphoria of the post signing, like in the grass is greener piece of this. I think it's closer than maybe people would want to acknowledge. I was looking at their like per minute type numbers, really similar. Like career, I think Trent is 18 points per 36. 55% true shooting, 39% threes on like 8 3-pointers per 36 attempted. Beasley is 17 points per 36 on 56% true shooting, so barely higher and low, higher efficiency, slightly lower scoring. 9 3-pointers per 36, 39%. So pretty much identical in terms of 3-point volume and accuracy. And so I think though probably the big differentiator, and Gary Trent worse in terms of 2-point accuracy. I think Gary Trent's a guy, probably some of the shot selection may, give Bucks fans some headaches at some point next year. We'll see. Especially, assuming he's starting. I think defensively, I think there is more upside to having Gary Trent. I think it has been a little while since we've seen Gary Trent defending at a high level.
Basically,
yeah. But it's not. Let me say this: if Gary Trent, as expected, is asked to defend the other team's best guard, he will at least have some muscle memory of having to do that back in the day when he played with Damian Lillard.
Right.
So he knows that role. Versus Malik was kind of like, wait, what? Like, it was kind of a King Ralph situation where it's like, wait, everybody's gone and I have to be the defensive stopper. What? Like I'm not the king of England over here. I've never seen King Ralph, by the way. I just remember that was, I think, the plot of it. So I think and just look at the numbers, right? Like Malik's listed at 6'4", 187, Trent 6'5", 209. So he's 20 pounds heavier, he's bigger. So again, we just have to hope that he buys in on the defensive end as part of this, prove it type of year. So again, we'll see. I would caution people from kind of expecting, him to be the answer to everyone's prayers. But, again, if he puts up like Malik Beasley offensive numbers, 11 points on 40 whatever percent 3-point shooting, with maybe better, more versatile defense, and he's playable in the playoffs, like I'll happily take that, But interestingly, I was looking at Gary Trent. He's barely played in the playoffs. I think he hasn't played in the playoffs in 2 years. He played I think he had 6 games with Toronto a couple years ago, and then he had one run with the Blazers and
Portland
and Dame. Yeah. So he's barely played in the playoffs. It's not like he's some grizzled playoff veteran, but again, he's also only 26 years old. So I think and just touching on kind of what is the potential path to keeping him? Ideal world, it works out well, and maybe not so well that he can go and sign a huge contract somewhere else. You could probably get to the taxpayer mid-level next summer. You offer him a 1+1, so he's got a little bit of insurance, and then after that first year, you'd have 2 years with the Bucks. He'd be an early bird free agent in 2026, and you could offer him up to a starting salary at the mid-level, which again, I think it was technically Dan Feldman who sent the email from the Dunked On account, because I read the same one. But I think it's absolutely right. And I think Nate has also pointed out, like, once guys take, a lot of times it comes in the context of buyouts, right? Like once guys take buyouts, all of a sudden you don't have bird rights with the team. Like your ability to then get to a much higher contract number is generally very challenging. And it was interesting, right? There's a reason why Gary Trent is not going back to Toronto. A year ago, they nearly signed him to a very hefty extension, and kind of something happened that it didn't work out. But I was at least encouraged that some of the Raptors people I follow were wishing good thoughts to him and seemingly were optimistic about his fit in Milwaukee. So it wasn't like people were, kicking him on the way out, at least.
Yeah, I think we've joked about it too, that it was always an adventure, to put it mildly, whenever Malik would put the ball on the floor, which it's not going to be the case, at least to those levels, with Gary Trent Jr. So that's the one piece where you're like, okay, I feel like there's something more here. But to your point, that's not necessarily a good thing, that there can be such thing as too much of that. Defensively, I think your hope is just, as I look at the conversation we had last year, where it was, I'd kill for Grayson Allen. Just be Grayson Allen defensively. Honestly, like if that's the baseline, that's fine. If that's what you give us and you're knocking down shots, because Grayson Allen, the limitations had more to do with his size, but he was bought in defensively and he was solid enough. It just, depending on the matchup, you were going to run into some issues there.
Did I hear correctly? I'm trying to verify this quick here, Justin, but did I hear correctly that Gary Trent has siblings named like Graydon, Grayson, and Garyson or something like that? Like they all have extremely similar names. And of course he is Gary Trent Jr. Or is his name I guess his full name is Gary. But his siblings are named very
siblings
similar.
Are Garrison, Grayson, and Graydon. Okay.
Uh,
So just play like Grayson Trent is what we're looking for, essentially. Before we wrap, we mentioned Doc Rivers joining the broadcast on ESPN and had some interesting things to say. I mentioned the way he spoke about MarJon, about Andre Jackson Jr. And, you know, it's not too much of a deviation from what we heard Doc essentially say about him anytime he was asked a year ago. But it's hard not to start to buy into the and even during the broadcast, PJ Carlissimo talking to Doc too, like, this seems like he'd be your guy, kind of hinting at can't really shoot that well, but he's bought in. He's a tenacious defender. Like, it seems like he'd be a perfect fit for you. And Doc had glowing things to say about him. And just as we talked about with all these additions, with Gary Trent, with DeLon Wright, those two especially, and Taurean Prince, it takes a lot of that pressure off of Andre Jackson. Now, we already know that's going to mean
he ain't going to play that much.
It's not going to be as much as we were maybe hoping for and having the conversations of, hey, is he going to be the starting two guard? That's out the window now. So I'm going to be curious to see where they pick their spots, because, like, I've mentioned this, and I am very curious, not necessarily only for the Bucks, but league wide, how we see teams approach this season in terms of number of games played and minutes played for their guys, because I know the money is still tied to it. It's not necessarily starting to trend. It's only one player we've seen do this, but we did see one player say, I'll take less money if it means we can build a winner here.
You're talking about LeBron, right?
I just wonder if we're going to see more of an understanding and a mutual partnership of, okay, I'll cut back on my workload if you think that's going to help us in the spring, because of the amount of injuries that we saw in the playoffs. And I know it's not a direct correlation that you can't just point to and say, hey, just because you rest players, it doesn't mean they're going to be healthy in the playoffs. But it is a knee-jerk league. And I do wonder if we're going to see that. And if that's the case, you would assume a guy like Andre Jackson Jr. and Gary Trent Jr. are going to be the benefactors there.
Yeah, I see. My thing with Andre, I'm probably more, I mean, not that like anybody thinks his offense is like great shakes or anything like that. I am probably more critical of Andre's offense. Like, this is the thing I always come back to. Every once in a while, I see people talk about, like, oh, like, can you try to develop him more as a point guard? Put the ball in his hands. That's what he was used to at UConn. And I'm just like, okay, first off, his shooting last year was totally acceptable. You would take 37% on low volume any day of the week. I just cannot get over it, guys. His ball handling, his nuclear athleticism. I literally spent like 30 minutes watching old UConn video to see, like, are there examples of him like taking a screen or just like going to the top of key, taking a dribble or two, getting the rim, and not even dunking, just finishing with layup. It never happens.
None.
He has no concept of how to use that handle and his athleticism to get to the rim and finish somehow, right? It just, and again, part of it's unselfishness because he loves to pass. But if you can't shoot and you're not going to put pressure on the rim, like, you can never be like a guy that has the ball in his hands really being threatening offensively. So I think, to me, he is a, dribble handoff, dunker spot, whatever guy, defensive utility guy. And that is totally fine. Like, but I just want to think we need to calibrate expectations on what he is and how you best leverage that. And so I think, to me, like, I don't really see a path to him being like a 30-minute per game guy. Because I think he's going to be situational. Now, defensively, I think he can work tons of different ways. But offensively, I think on a team that's built around Giannis, there's always going to be trade-offs playing him with Giannis. And so I think if he's a 15-minute per game guy, 18-minute per game guy, if it's just like a consistent role and they plug him in and he gives you a spark, I'm totally fine with that. Like, I think if he's playing, 25 minutes per game, again, I think probably offensively, like, I guess just the theory of that. I know you read off some of the stats on like some of the lineup stuff, which, was weirdly encouraging, but, obviously it's like such a small sample. It's almost hard to really kind of take anything from it. So I'm okay with it. And again, like, Vegas is such a useless exercise for Andre because, like, he's playing with like not
Right.
guys who are like of similar talent level to him. Like, I mean, his numbers are just terrible offensively. Like, I know he got hurt tonight. Hopefully it's not a serious hand injury, but like, honestly, like if he doesn't play anymore in Vegas, like it's fine, whatever.
Fine. Yeah.
And again, hopefully they just find out a way to kind of use that kind of spark plug nature of his. Again, sub him in for Giannis, in first quarters or something, right? Like, I know he's not a 4 per se, but figure out ways to kind of get his energy in the game. I think it's going to be useful. But yeah, I'm again, I'd love to see him get consistent minutes. But yeah, I mean, for him and AJ Green, they are kind of the losers of the summer in some ways, just given the signings that the Bucks made and the fact that certainly Gary Trent and Wright, are going to be, I think if you're going to pay, who are going to get the three guys that get the most minutes in the backcourt, I think it's Dame plus those two guys, especially with Wright and his defensive versatility. I think he's a better defender than Trent is, so he could certainly close games at times, depending on matchups and things like that.
Yeah, I'm not as much concerned to that point about the minutes that he plays, especially on a per game basis. It's more of, hey, he's got to play in 65 games to qualify for Defensive Player of the Year. So can we at least up to that mark? The last thing is Doc Rivers has had a tendency to do in letting things slip out there. I saw the same reaction from everyone basically on social media of, wait, what? Doc Rivers let it slip. Hey, Khris Middleton had surgery, but he's doing great. He was hurt during the playoffs, had surgery, but he's going to be fine and ready for the upcoming season here.
So I heard something. I heard something a few weeks ago about this, and so Doc did not say it was ankle surgery. I heard it was ankle surgery. Not surprising. That's what you would assume, given he missed 5-6 weeks with that left ankle injury. He also hurt his right ankle in the playoffs, but obviously didn't miss any games because of it. So yeah, I am operating on the assumption that it is going to be it was a left ankle surgery. It's obviously not good news. He was in Vegas this week, and I asked Eric Name, I was like, how's he walking around? He's like, oh, he looks fine. No indications of surgery. Again, where he is in his rehab, like, I don't know. I heard it was like a 2-month type thing. So it supposedly happened, I think, right after the season. But I have no other details. I think we're going to probably hear some reporting here very soon on it. But so yeah, you just hope, like, okay, he can start to do workouts hopefully soon if he hasn't already started. And then, we still have a couple months till training camp. So knock on wood, fingers crossed, every other possible thing you can do to curry good luck and favor. Hopefully Khris Middleton is actually available at the start of camp, and we don't have to see him, slowly ramped up yet again for a third straight year. But yeah, obviously it was, I think disappointing for him and now disappointing for Bucks fans. But hey, look, and by the way, it's like hilarious to me that teams and agents like don't want this stuff getting out. Like we saw it with Giannis and Chris last year when they both had their, they both had their knee procedures, and it's like, it's going to get out, right? Like Chris was going to free agency, like, okay, but you can't like hide that from teams, so I don't know. It's all just kind of silly to me that they try to kind of cover this up. I guess the upside is, we got the last couple months of, blissful ignorance, and we didn't have to have people worrying about Khris Middleton's, surgically repaired ankle until he was already upright and not in a boot or anything like that. So I don't know. It is what it is, but this is a pro Khris Middleton podcast. So hopefully he is indeed fine. And until he's not, I will assume that he will be fine, because why bring that type of bad energy into this home, into this podcast? I don't know if you had anything else on that, Justin. I was going to ask, I did want to discuss your favorite Bucks Summer League, or Khris Livingston, and at least give a shout out to him and Ryan Rollins, because I think Rollins was really good again tonight. I thought he was really good in the first game. I mean, he's on a 2-way contract, so there's nothing the Bucks need to do, right? Like, he's already under contract. I don't know. Again, is there any path to him getting minutes for the Milwaukee Bucks in this coming season? Like, I highly doubt it. but he's only 22 years old. He's only 2 years removed from being, I think what 44th overall pick, something like that.
Yep.
Came out of Toledo fairly young, and just kind of like does everything pretty well. And again, like I don't know what that means in terms of potential future NBA role, but for a Bucks team that obviously like isn't blessed with tons and tons of guard / wing depth. He's not that tall, but I think he's got like a 6'9", 6'10" wingspan, and like we saw the other night in that block he had, like he can play big at times. So yeah, nothing else. Like let's see what he continues to do with the Herd. He had, I think, a pretty promising start, and so I will not say the same about Jalen Galloway, but Brian Rollins seems like at least a two-way keeper. And Khris Livingston as well just kind of keeps doing kind of Khris Livingston things, which again, how that translates to, an NBA role, I don't know. But again, kudos to those guys for doing good things on a basketball court and not, causing us stress and consternation.
Yeah, I mean, those three guys, AJ Johnson and then Ryan Rollins and Khris Livingston, the three that caught your eye the most in this game. And I think in aggregate for the full summer league so far.
And Tyler Smith, I think Tyler Smith has been really solid too. Like just kind of as advertised, kind of doing what we thought he would do.
And in the game last night too, albeit very limited, but there were some flashes of Hugo Bassan as well, where you could see, okay, here's a guy that's playing professionally. Oh, wait, no. Now it's a couple of those possessions, but there was at least a handful of those possessions that were okay,
big dunk.
I'm interested by this.
Big dunk. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it was a dunk that like, if a guy who's not like a white French guy does it, everybody's like, yeah, whatever. But like because it was Hugo Bassan doing it, the announcers like got really excited about it. I actually rewound it. I didn't see it live. I was like, wait, what did Hugo just do? And I was like, okay, he like barely got the ball over the rim on a two-handed dunk. But,
barely dunked the two-handed dunk, but still caught us all off guard. We'll be back again a couple of times this week. So Camille and I have a show taking a look at some of the moves that did not work out too well for the Bucks, whether it be trades, free agencies, etc. So that will come your way at some point this week. And we're going to knock out some mailbag questions as well, as we have a handful that have come in through email and a few tweets to all three of us as well. So Frank, you and I are going to tackle those mailbag questions a little bit later in the week. We were wondering if we'd have to do a specialty show later this week. Hopefully, hey, the Bucks have signed Gary Trent Jr. and it came about 2 to 3 days earlier than I anticipated we would have to do. So that was the good piece of news to come from this week. That'll do it for today's show. For Frank, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.